Hello and welcome. Today we'll be taking a look at Skywave Segmented VCO and the Skywave Scaffold Expander by SetonixSynth. Skywave is a segmented VCO, meaning it breaks up your waveform into segments of different oscillators of the same frequency. You could have control of up to 4 segments, you could have 3 segments, or you could have 2 segments. So what it's doing is being clocked by itself. Every time the wave cycle completes, it jumps to the next step. And if you want CV control over all these knobs and a sub output, there's Scaffold. And I'll mention the elephant in the room. Yes, these are purple panels. The module comes in standard black. And if you send SetonixSynth an email, which I'll put down below in the description, just ask for the purple panel and you may have some left. But before we get started, there's a few settings on the back that we could utilize to customize this module even more. First, you'll notice there's this fun artwork on the back, which I had the honor of actually being able to design. Skywave Chili. If you know a certain Ohio restaurant of a similar name, you'll get this. Either way, it's a greasy fast food bag. So we'll see we have our power input here, either way, and our scaffold input here with red stripe down. So as you can see, there are these super teeny tiny switches on the back here, labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll show on the screen here what these do. 1 and 2 kind of work together. You either have one on and one off, or vice versa. So switch 1 is for the sub on Scaffold to be sent to the clock on Skywave. But first, you have to get the Skywave clock out of the way. So there is switch 2, which you have off if you want the Scaffold clock going into it, or you have it on if you want the regular Skywave clock going out the clock output. Now switch 3 is our reset behavior. To the left or off is reset by a trigger. So anything going into the reset input basically is turned into a trigger to reset the clock. Or you can reset via gate, where anytime the gate is high, it resets the clock, but it stays at 1 until the gate goes low. Then the clock continues. And the fourth one is for the behavior of the frequency modulation input. To the left is through 0 phase modulation, and to the right is through 0 frequency modulation. All right, now we're all plugged in. We're ready to go. Feeling good? It's Skywave time. So what is Skywave and how does it work? Well, Skywave is an oscillator. You get morph control from triangle to saw to pulse. A real interesting pulse. And you get level control over that waveform from 0 to fully positive, or invert it. You get pulse width control over the pulse, but that's not all. You get control over 4 of them that are tied to the same frequency. Each one of these is going into the channel of a sequential switch, so to speak, and it's being clocked by itself. So each waveform, it goes to the next one, giving us control of 4 waves in a sequence. And we can see it going down the sequence here in LFO mode. But to avoid inadvertent clicks and such from a sequential switch, each one is going into a VCA, so it's a lot cleaner. So we can control each wave individually to whatever we want. We could invert certain waves, set certain waves to lower levels, and just set whatever kind of unique waveform that we want. And that is just one cycle of our waveform on the scope. And you'll notice that not only do we get upper harmonics when we pull in different levels of things on here, we get lower harmonics. We get subs. And we can make our sequence a little bit more unique, or use it momentarily as an effect. We could switch to 3 steps, which it only goes through 3, and you can hear we get a 5th, even though if I go back to triangle wave for all of them, it's our normal pitch. So we're getting pseudo power chords here. Or you could go to 2 steps, and your sequence basically jumps up an octave from the 4th step. Or rather, you lose that sub. Let's go back to the 4th step. Now that's great and all, but wait till we get to the CV, and better yet, the expander. So we of course have full proactive tracking with Skywave. We have FM modulation or phase modulation depending on what setting you have on the back of the module. We then have oscillator sync. We have pulse width modulation of everything pulse wave. And then even better, we have the waveform CV control, which controls all of these knobs together, and these knobs are the offset value. So we can see all those waveforms changing. And you could do the same thing with the levels. Which does interesting things when things are negative. At negative, it obviously does the opposite for a really interesting back and forth effect with the waveforms. We could then clock the external switch with an external signal. So right now we're just locked on a single step, and I could cycle through manually if I want. Or we could put, say, an oscillator into it. What happens if we match the pitch? It just goes pretty crazy still because I'm not matching it exactly. So the phase is constantly moving. But we could also reset our sequence. See, we could kind of bias it to 3 steps, 4 steps, 2 steps, bring it up to just 1 step. That is kind of resetting on itself. So a lot of really cool FM opportunities to be had here. Let's look at FMing the Wave CD. Get real interesting pulse width modulation sort of effects here when I'm matching the pitch with a square wave, pulse wave, going into the wave CV. Now let's look at a triangle wave. So that's kind of acting like an LFO until I go a little bit off. And we get real cool FM sounds. And we could also get the same effect, or rather AM sounds, with the level CV. And what happens if we FM mod both of these? Get a really cool waveforms with FM modulation, and I'm not even FMing the pitch at all. Now let's add some pulse width back in. On top of this, we also have our sine wave and our oscillator clock to sync to other oscillators, or just want a pulse wave output. And, you know, you get your classic sine wave. Great. So that, in a nutshell, is Skywave. But wait, there's an expander here. Skywave Scaffold. This module gives you CV control over each knob on Skywave here for the oscillators, and it gives you a subclock output at your normal pitch, divided by 4 sub, and a divided by 2 sub. And we're hearing all 4 of these pitches in our base Skywave output because we're cycling through 4. So first, let's go crazy with LFOs, just going into all 8 inputs on Scaffold. I'm just going to randomly put a cable into each input. And I'm going to just set all of these at 0 and let the LFOs do the talking. And I'll modulate the CV of the LFO with another LFO. And then let's throw some VCOs into the wave and level. That's a nice drone. Now let's add an LFO into the pulse width. This is with no reverb or effects of any kind. This is just the raw oscillator. Let's listen to it. Let's hear one of those oscillators into the FM input. And the other into the sync. Again, no reverb on this. So that, in a nutshell, is Skywave and Scaffold. Now let's look at some fun patches with it. So right now I have my Oxy 1 sequencer sequencing the Skywave. The Skywave output is going into the scope, and then out into a filter, and then out into mingles as a VCA. So right now, again, I'm modulating from oct to modulate just some of the waves and one of the levels, and then also the pulse width modulation. So I'm going to plug in the VCA, and then I'm going to turn down the frequency, and let's play our sequence. It's also worth noting that the release on the envelope is being also modulated by an LFO. Turn that filter down. Let's turn the resonance all the way off on that filter so we're just hearing Skywave. Let's do the sequence of 3. And let's jump up to 2. Let's open up the frequency all the way. Let's add a little bit of panning into this. Let's go back to 4. And what if we FM modulated this with another oscillator? I'm going to use CVO here. And I'm going to use a triangle wave. And this is tuned just a couple octaves up from the Skywave pitch. Let's open the envelope all the way. Now watch what happens when I go to the 2-step sequence. We start to get more of a chippy 8-bit sort of sound, but like grungy. Let's open the frequency all the way on the filter. So now let's sequence the clock here with this similar but higher frequency square wave. Lots of cool FM stuff to enhance that Moog or East Coast style patch. Now let's take the same sequence and let's just flip it into a West Coast style patch. All I have to do is turn the frequency down on the filter pretty much all the way, and I'm going to basically treat my release and my decay the same to give that more actual triggered pluck sort of sound, and turn the sustain all the way down. You can kind of adjust your waveform a little bit if you want a longer tail. You could add a little bit more to the release, or you could cut it off. But you get that nice pluckiness from the decay anyways. Let's add some effects. Let's go to the try. And back to the 4. Alright, let's cut those effects out. And those are East and West Coast patches with Skywave. So a quick little oscillator patch tip for a nice, easy, accessible oscillator style that you want to go for without having to patch like crazy. So what I want to do is have the waveform change every time I hit a key, or rather every time the gate is triggered. So I'm going to mult my gate and put it into the oscillator clock. Now every time the gate gets sent to the envelope generator, it also changes our waveform. Let's move our filter down for a little bit more East Coast sound. And that is a fun little changing East Coast style patch. Now let's listen to Skywave a little bit deeper with what it does best as a drone. So I have the Skywave output going into a very basic filter, going into a VCA. And I'm going to plug an LFO into a full wave rectifier, which will rectify that LFO into fully positive for both directions. And we have the VCA constantly opening and closing slowly. And let's throw another LFO into the filter cutoff. And we just got them moving nice and slow. Let's slow this down. And let's add some effects in. And now let's just add more and more modulation to it. Let's turn this pitch up a bit. And now I'm going to throw some random steps into the level CV from steps. Let's add that sub clock. Let's throw different clock into this. And let's sync it to our oscillator. syncing from the sine wave is giving interesting effects. Let's sync from the oscillator clock. This is just FM modulating the clock with a synced oscillator. Let's move that around. When I'm feeding back the FM from a synced oscillator that is synced from Skywave, get real interesting effects. And if you're worried that it's just drown and reverb and delay right now, let's listen to it try. And let's get that delay back. Let's clock the subclock again. This is a times 48 clock. That sounds nasty. And that is using Skywave as a nice drone. So now let's look at Skywave as an interesting LFO. Right now I moved the sequence over to Manacitaridis, and we're going to just take this LFO and apply it to different parameters on Manacitaridis. Start with a simple one, envelope. Alright, now let's jump over to the low pass filter. Now the triangle wave amongst all those weird angly gates in the waveform give us a nice swelling sound. Now let's go to deep, which is the profundity, or rather it's kind of like pulse width sort of effect. Let's slow this down a bit. So when you have it really slow, it's nice because it feels like it should be a cycling, repeating waveform, but every time it's different, at least for 4 times. speed it up. Let's check out audio rate. Let's turn off the effects, actually. And let's go back to LFO mode. And let's go to Smash, which is basically a wave folder. Let's go to the bash, which basically adds noise on the attack, or it reverses it. Again, we just have constantly changing timbres on this voice from Skywave. It'd also be great on Basimulis Iteratus Alter for the waveform. Now let's go to the saw mod. This one's going to get more crazy. And what if we put it in the pitch? Or what if we put it in the mode? And then what if I took the sine wave out and put that into the octave select? Actually, let's put that sine wave in the filter. And now what if we actually multed our Skywave output? I'm going to put that back into the saw mod so we could really hear it. And what if we multed our Skywave output into its own FM mod? It's going to increase its speed anytime the wave gets to the top, but it's going to get all janky and weird because it's going through the sequence of 4. But we could see that it's always skipping past that first step for some reason until I go to really fast speeds. Here's a real interesting effect here. Let's go to 3. That's cool. And 4. it's weird that I'm in VCO mode and it is slowing down at certain levels. So it speeds up, slows down. And that is using Skywave as an LFO.